Every week, we talk MLB Draft until the Orioles make the first pick in the 2022 MLB Draft come All-Star Weekend. Joining us now, tell us more about his thoughts, of course, from Baseball America. He is Mr. Carlos Collazzo, and he's with us on GCR. Carlos, it's Glenn and Griffin in Baltimore. It's good to chat with you again, man. Thank you for taking the time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
It's good to hear from you, Carlos. I know it's been a few weeks since we've last seen a mock draft from you. Is there any reason to think that you've changed your mind about anything related to the top of the draft?
Yeah, I think we're constantly changing our minds this time of year. We're getting closer. I think the last time we put out a mock, we were very much still in the speculative area. There wasn't really too much hard information on the ground. And I feel like now we're getting into the point in the year where you are starting to hear a few rumors. And then I guess the biggest challenge is trying to decide which of those rumors are legit and which of those are just noise. Because as you guys know, with Baltimore picking at the top, it is always very tricky. They're always very creative. It's never a straightforward process. So I think we're starting to get into that peak mock draft season, and you guys should see some updated mocks from us in the very near future.
So I'm in a weird place, Carlos, where I have accepted from the multitude of folks that I've chatted with about this. I have come around to the idea that Drew Jones is the de facto top player in this draft. But what I haven't come around to is the idea that means that's what the Orioles are doing with the number one pick. And I almost operate, I assume college bat until they prove otherwise to me. Am I wrong to feel that way?
I mean, no, that's honestly how I come about things too. I think I'm with you on all of those. It definitely seems like Drew is the consensus top player in the class. Like you said, that definitely doesn't mean Baltimore's going to take him. I mean, they did take Adley Rutschman when he was the consensus top player in the class in 2019, and they were picking 1-1. But I do think the college factor there changes things a little bit, whether or not they would want to do that with a high school player or even still. I don't know that the gap between Drew and the next group of players is quite as large as maybe the gap between Adley and the next few players in that 2019 draft. So you're comparing apples and oranges a little bit, but I think you're pretty much spot on with how you're feeling about things, and you also get to some of the insecurities that people like me who make mock drafts have to deal with when Baltimore is in that spot.
Right. All right, so let's cover a couple of things. Why to you is Drew Jones the top guy in this draft?
Yeah. I think he just possesses the best combination of future upside, tools, and current skills. There are a lot of players who have some combination or some blend of those. He really has all of them. I mean, he's 6'4", 180 pounds. He's going to add more strength. He has power now, and you can project him to have above average power in the future. He's one of the best pure hitters in the class, so he's probably not overall the best pure hitter. Guys like Termarr Johnson, Brooks Lee, Kevin Parada on the college side might be the best pure hitters. But then you get to the supplemental tools, and they stack up with really anyone in the class that you want to compare him to. He's a potential double-plus defender in center field. His father is one of the best defensive center fielders of all time, and that's very apparent in his game. He brings speed. He's going to play a premium position. So if you look at some of these hitters, especially on the college side, there are a lot of players who are maybe not up-the-middle talents, and when you combine the up-the-middle profile of Drew Jones with his hitting ability, with his future projection gains that you can kind of assume that he's going to make as he fills out physically, I think he just checks all the boxes, and there's really no weakness or hole in his game that I'm aware of.
I spoke to a scout recently who said, yeah, I think Drew Jones is the best player in the draft, but I think there's a chance still that Elijah Green has the highest upside of any player in the draft. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's spot on too. I think the difference there is you look at Elijah Green and Drew Jones, and just physically, Elijah Green is one of the more unique athletes that we have had come out of the draft in a very long time. You just don't see baseball players who look like him, who have the sort of power that he has with the speed that he has. And he's done a fantastic job of showing that power in game throughout the summer showcase circuit. Last year, this spring against good competition in Florida, he's hit really well. So I think if you look at just in terms of overall upside, if all of these players pan out to the best of their tools, his tools are the most explosive. I think the reason you'd have a guy like Elijah below Drew on a board maybe is you have maybe a few more questions about where he's going to play defensively, the quality of that hit tool, how much of his offensive profile is going to come with some swing and miss. Is he going to be a lower average guy who's just going to succeed by getting to enough power? So that's maybe where there's a little bit more risk in his offensive profile. But, yeah, the tools and the pure upside, I think it's very easy to say that Elijah has the biggest upside overall in the class.
Carlos Collazzo, Baseball America, with us here on GCR as we're talking about the MLB Draft. Carlos, I'm going to go back to a question that I've asked a few times. The way that the Orioles have built themselves, and with
Mhm.
Adley Rutschman already being here now, and Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall likely, this season, maybe the beginning of next year at the latest, is there something to be said for it? It would be maybe somewhat nonsensical for them to go with a high school bat or someone who's a few years away. Or,
Mhm.
again, maybe we compare and say, hey, Bobby Witt got to the major leagues just as quickly as Adley Rutschman did.
Mhm.
Perhaps that's overblown, the idea that it needs to be a college bat in order to make that
Yeah.
timeline work.
Yeah, I think you could probably make both arguments pretty convincingly. I think there's enough evidence on either side for you to lay out kind of your opinions and back it up. I do think when you're talking about the elite high school athletes in any draft class, those guys tend to move a lot quicker than the average high school player. You mentioned Bobby Witt. There are a number of other high school players like a Jared Kelenic who moved pretty quickly as well. You got some guys in the Diamondback system like a Corbin Carroll who, outside of injury, might already be at a major league level. And I think Drew is a player who I don't anticipate him needing a ton of time. He's a pretty refined player right now. And again, he is playing one of those premium positions where you don't need to just prove everything with the bat, so there's less pressure there. But like you said, the Orioles are kind of nearing the end of the rebuild. Hopefully, their pitching has been pretty good this year, better than a lot of people expected. Adley is finally on the big league team, so you would like things to start coming together. And when you are sitting at the top of a draft class that's very strong on a college hitting demographic that the Baltimore Orioles have shown a tendency to really go after, I think you can make the argument on both sides. I don't know which one is the right one. I think they both could be right, just depending on how your board lines up and what you feel about your player development, what you do well, what you maybe don't do as well. But I think both can be defensible. For me, I think you just always should probably take the best player available. You don't
Yeah.
pick one often. And when you're there, I think you want to try and get the best talent you can.
Is there anything unique about this draft that would make it more worthwhile to try to save some money and cut a deal, or is it
Mhm.
basically like every other draft where it's an utter crapshoot as to whether or not you'll get the guy that you would want to get after you do that?
Yeah, I think I think the one thing that maybe is an advantage if you do want to cut a deal is the top 8 or so group of hitters, and they're all hitters on our board, and I imagine most other boards are all going to be bats. They're all very good. So if if you don't see a lot of separation, maybe you think Drew is just barely the top player, and the money that he's going to be asking for isn't really worth the drop off between whoever your number 2 player is. There are a lot of really good hitters to grab here, and the Orioles have shown some success of making those underslot deals up top and then moving money around to guys like Kobe Mayo, who
Mm-hmm.
still gets to get really good reviews from our side on the scouting side. So I think just the fact that you have a number of hitters that you can feel really confident in that can fill holes in your organization still. You can never have enough hitters at all these positions. It's not like they're going to be blocked. I imagine they're not going to be on the catchers in this range, but there's still enough other hitters who can fit in that I think it could still make some sense. There's nothing really about this draft class specifically that I would say makes that more questionable than it would be in a typical year.
All right. If it is a college bat, right? If
Yeah.
that's the route they go again, is there a clear separation that Brooks Lee is the top college bat in this draft?
I think for me, it's Brooks Lee and Kevin Parada, probably neck and neck. Um, with Brooks Lee, you've got a guy who's going to be playing the infield, probably third base or second base, maybe the best pure hitter in the class. But again, I think Kevin Parada would be the other player you point to and argue as potentially the best hitter in the class. Both of these guys came out of Southern California in high school and were very highly regarded as high school hitters and have just continued to mash at the college level. I think with Brooks, you have maybe some questions about the body. He's dealt with some injuries, so that maybe is your question mark with him. With Parada, your question is going to be, is he a catcher? There are some scouts who think he's going to stick behind the position. Some think he's going to have to move. But I think with both these guys, you're getting high average. You're getting some power. Brooks Lee has hit for a ton of doubles, and I imagine he'll continue to have those translate into homers. Then Kevin Parada went on an absolute home run binge this year, and I think he's got a chance to be a really impressive middle-of-the-order type bat as well. So I think those would be the top two, and depending on who you go with, probably depends on your thoughts on their defensive positioning and maybe if you think there's an edge in overall hit tool. For me, I think Kevin Parada is just as good a hitter, but if you like third base, second base, defensive profile, I could see leaning towards Brooks.
So let's talk about, because as you point out, I don't think the Orioles are going to be in on a catcher, but as you
Mm-hmm.
point out, is Parada a catcher? And if he's not a catcher, is it really just that he's a first baseman DH? Does he have a position if he's not a catcher?
Yeah, he was always pretty athletic for a catcher out of high school. He's gotten a little bit bigger. Maybe he could play a corner outfield position.
Okay.
He's always run a little bit better than an average catcher in college. I do kind of tend to agree with you. It just seems it would be a little bit odd for the Orioles to go that direction, just given who is in their system right now. And if you are taking Kevin Parada and immediately moving him, you do lose some value. And I would imagine the
Right.
team that takes him is probably going to want to stick with the catching bat as long as possible. Because if you can get that bat behind the plate, obviously, like with having a guy like Adley Rutschman, you guys know how valuable a player like that is. So it would be a little bit surprising, but at the same time, if you do think he's the best hitter in the draft and he's showing power now, maybe it's as simple as, hey, you like the hit and the power, and that's the most important thing, and everything else you'll figure out later.
Brooks Lee, of course, is intriguing because he is a kid that is literally named after Brooks Robinson, right? And so the idea of Brooks Lee playing third base in Baltimore is, there's something kind of romantic
Yeah.
about that. I just want to make it very clear. There's no world in which he could end up being a shortstop at the major league level.
Uh, I would never want to say there's no world, but I would say it's highly probable that he moves off the position.
Yeah.
There was some feedback this year that he has looked a little bit better defensively. He is sure-handed. It's not like the glove is very questionable. I think it's more of a range question. He just doesn't have that lateral mobility that you would typically see with major league middle infielders. At the same time, how we've seen with shifting, maybe range is less important than ever. And there are teams like the Cardinals who will put a player who you typically don't view as a legitimate shortstop and then actually turns out to be better. So I wouldn't want to put a 0% chance, but it's certainly very unlikely that he would stick at the position at the next level, I would imagine.
And is there any argument at all for Jacob Berry from LSU?
Sure. I mean, he's a fantastic hitter as well. I think Jacob Berry and Jace Young both have really, really complete offensive profiles. Less defensive value than the guys we've been talking about. Jace is definitely going to be a second baseman. Most likely he might move to first. Jacob Berry, first base, DH only type. But both of these guys have proven to be very capable hitters, high averages, and really good conference. Fantastic on base percentage with power. So just those classic kind of refined college hitters who you have a lot of confidence in, maybe don't have the highest ceilings compared to some of these other high school players and players like a Parada who maybe can play catcher or a Brooks Lee who maybe can provide value at third base defensively. But if you just want to have confidence in a bat, both of these guys make sense at the top of a draft, and I would imagine they're both gone at some point in the top 10 picks. And if one of them was an underslot guy higher, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
All right, Carlos Collazzo, just two things quickly before I let you go. One, how does Kumar Rocker factor into this draft?
That is a big question, isn't it? I guess hopefully we'll get a better idea once he's actually pitching
Mm-hmm.
in any ball. But I think even if he does pitch, I mean, I don't know how much scouts are going to be able to change their opinion on him from last year. Because last year he was still healthy and pitching. So it seems like it's just going to come down to the medical and come down to what the doctors think. So I think even leading up to the draft, I would imagine Kamara is going to be one of the biggest wild cards in this draft. Hopefully we can get some more confidence and have a little bit of consensus on where he's going to fall. But there's really no telling right now. And I guess just hopefully we can get some more information after he goes out there and throws and kind of hopefully shows that he's still the same guy.
All right, and then last thing for you. Now that he's here, where are you at as far as expectations are concerned for Adley Rutschman? He had a multi-hit game last night, so we're ready to go ahead and build the statue now.
Yeah, do it.
But where are you with reasonable expectations? And I ask that in the context of like, we remember there being a Matt Wieters once upon a time in Baltimore. He had a phenomenal MLB career by any measurement. And yet, he's considered a bust in this town because he was supposed to
Yeah.
be Joe Mauer with power and Jesus and cleats. So what is reasonable for Adley Rutschman? I ask, reminding you that people in Baltimore genuinely believe he's supposed to be some sort of amalgamation of Mike Piazza's bat and Pudge Rodriguez behind the plates.
Yeah, it's tough because this has kind of been the guy everyone has been waiting for years and years. He's the face of the rebuild. Kind of all the hopes are pinned to Adley. So I imagine there is an absolute ton of pressure on him. The prospect that he was puts a lot of pressure on him to perform. I would just say that view him similar to guys like Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt Jr., who were in a similar phylum of player entering the year in terms of prospect status. Both of those guys went through their struggles. Player development is certainly not linear, and as polished as these guys are, there are going to be some learning curves. So I'd just say, as much as you can, be patient, let him go through the rest, because on top of just learning major league hitting and getting adjusted to that with the bat, he has got all the challenges of getting used to the staff, managing that pitching staff. There's significantly more work that Adley has to do than another hitter in another position. But I think he's a very polished hitter. I think he can hold his own. And I would expect him to have I don't know that you're going to view him as one of the top hitters in baseball immediately. That would be rare and surprise, even regardless of if his prospect status entering the year. But I'd just say be patient, give him a year, and don't look at his stats at the end of the season and kind of try to figure out this is what his career is going to be, because a lot of things will change.
Carlos, what can we plug for you? What do you guys have coming up with Baseball America? Other content you're doing? What all can we get plugs in for?
Yeah, I'd just say check out the website, baseballamerica.com. We are currently working on our draft preview issue of the magazine. So we'll have an updated top 500 rankings coming out soon. We should have a mock draft coming out soon. Hopefully next week will be our next mock draft. But yeah, anything that I'm doing is going to be over at baseballamerica.com, and also the prospect team who handles minor leagues and the top 100 minor league prospects. They have been very busy this year as well. A lot of updates to all the teams in baseball. So we've got some Orioles updates already in season, some players who are trending in the right direction, and some international prospects that are doing well in that system, and that's refreshing to see as well.
Yeah,
So I
that's
would just
new.
say check out baseballamerica.com.
And at Carlos A. Collazzo on Twitter is how you follow him. Carlos, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for taking some time. We'd love to do it again as we get closer to the draft.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. Carlos Collazzo, Baseball America, checking in with us here on GCR.